There are many reasons why people develop mental illnesses. Some are genetic or biological. Some are a result of childhood trauma or overwhelming stress at school, work, or home. Some stem from environmental injustice or violence. Sometimes we simply don't know. Regardless of the reasons, these are health problems just like cancer, arthritis, and diabetes. So, why does society look at people with mental illnesses, including substance use disorders, differently? The answer is stigma. The real question, however, is how do we stop it?
Lulema everyone,
And you're currently streaming
The Generation Gap.
Yes.
This is the only lighthearted podcast starring two geekly girls, gathering people from different generations to discuss some not so lighthearted topics. Today's hello was in Sesotho. Okay, so guys, today we have yet another serious topic that we have gathered to discuss.
It's something very important and we need to raise awareness about it.
Yep. So today's topic is the stigma associated with depression. So before we get talking, let's introduce our guests for today. Joining us for today's discussion, we have two very knowledgeable people. We have a talented student going to complete his Bachelor of Sciences at the London School of Economics and Political Science, also the founder and CEO of the Couch Camp 2020-2021. Please welcome Mr. Shaurya Chandravanshi from Gen Z.
Hi,
You can
that's
say
the
hi.
funniest introduction I've had in my life. But sure, thank you.
Along with Shaurya, we have an inclusion champion and the head of inclusion at Pristine Private School. Please welcome Miss Ashwika Ashwinikumar
Or Ash.
from Gen Y.
Ash is good. Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so guys, thank you so much for coming today. We're waiting to get your insight on today's topic. Okay, so to introduce the idea, today's topic sparked from a TED talk that I recently saw by a woman named Ellen Sachs. So now she's a psychology and psychiatry professor at the University of Southern California Law School. So she lives every day with schizophrenia, which is a chronic brain disorder. In her TED talk, she spoke about her story of healing and recovery and the restraints and treatment and all of that stuff. But the big wake up call for me was when I heard her address the stigma related to the mental health. So she said that she didn't feel comfortable telling anyone about her mental illness because of the stigma that dwells at its name. And that's really upsetting, right? Was told that her treatment should be done discreetly, and that really shows how socially unaccepted her schizophrenia diagnosis was to those around her. So this stigma is really a big problem, and it's actually what delays the treatment of many people, as she spoke about in her TED talk. She was talking about how so many people in the US jail suffer from schizophrenia, and one of the prime reasons why they are all in jail is because of the existence of the stigma, which delays the treatment. And that is why today's episode is dedicated to this discussion about the stigma regarding mental health and depression.
Yeah, so for segment 1, we want to talk about the stigma, like what is the stigma associated with depression, why it exists, and where is it alive.
Yeah, so just breaking down what exactly the stigma is.
Also, did we talk about
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can go for it.
Yeah. I think what's important is understanding what mental illness is and having a really sound understanding about, since we're talking about depression, having a good awareness about depression. And for me personally, I feel like stigma comes from ignorance and the fact that society fails to understand or have a sound knowledge about what mental illness is all about.
Yeah.
I'm going to give my extremely uninformed, non-expert viewpoint because Ms. Ashwika actually knows what she's talking about. just from a normal layman perspective, I think like in my experience, I think stigma consists of, first of all, the idea that you are actually in control of your mental health and that mental illnesses are thus a failure of you to keep that control in check. So, for example, people will believe that the reason that you shouldn't be sort of, public about the fact that you have depression is because it's your fault that you have depression. Maybe you aren't acting right, you aren't eating properly, you aren't exercising, or so on and so forth. And I think that's because a lot of people think that these illnesses have a significant amount to do with the sort of active choices that people make, which may be true to some extent. But I think that if we were a lot more public about sort of the neurological and chemical reasoning behind these disorders, people become a lot less averse to taking others seriously. So, for example, if you thought that a fever was something that someone could choose to put themselves into, you would probably be less sympathetic towards them. But we know that a fever comes from just a virus, and so we don't do that. I think that's one of the main things. And the second thing I think comes from sort of the lack of seriousness for treatment, because I think, especially in our part of the world, people don't take therapy very seriously. And I think this part of the stigma is something that I guess you could call me a part of, because I think therapy in our part of the world is also very suspect. And thus people think that seeking sort of solutions for mental health illnesses is something that is sort of a waste of money, because they think, oh, why do you need someone to talk to you about it? Why don't you just do it with your family and friends? Why don't you just get over it? And that part, I think, is a lot more controversial. The first part, being skeptical of therapy, I'd have to agree with. The second part, I understand, is a bit unfair.
Just to add what he said, I mean, that's totally right, Shaurya, because the reason people kind of evade from seeking treatment is because of cultural aspects and society's perception. Okay, so you have a mental illness, that's also considered as a weakness, you know. And when you look in, for example, the Asian culture, you look into how bringing achievement into the family and having your emotions in control, these are all strengths. And when you look at someone who has a mental illness, that's considered as a weakness, and that sort of brings shame, right? And that's how society would look at mental illness. So why would anyone want to go for treatment, and why would anyone, and I think Ruhi had mentioned about the TED Talk speaker, and how she was supposed to seek treatment discreetly. This is why they seek treatment discreetly, because society will perceive them in a very different manner. And that's true, because from where I come from an educational perspective, and working in a school with children who have special needs, or who have children who have bipolar, depression, anxiety, they do receive special treatment, but not because of their disability. I don't want to say disability, I prefer saying barrier, but yeah, it's disability. It's not because they have a disability, it's because we want them to succeed. So we give them these special arrangements because they should just merely succeed in life. Right?
Yeah, I agree with what both of y'all said, and I think y'all very well explained why the stigma exists. I also think another reason is because of like some misleading media representations of mental illness. Like I was reading this one article, and it was about how some movies, they just label people with mental illness to be a certain way. Like for example, the very popular film Joker, which released in 2019. In that, the lead character was a person with mental illness, and he's portrayed to be very extremely violent and all of that. And because of that, I feel like, I mean, again, I'm not an expert about this topic, but based on what I read that article, that's what it suggests, that because of that misleading portrayal of the character, it's just labeled that's how people with mental illnesses are, which can also maybe give rise to the stigma.
I would question whether that's necessarily something that we can oppose, because there are absolutely illnesses that could make you more prone to violence. There are absolutely illnesses such as psychopathy, which explicitly state in the DSM diagnostic criteria that you have a lack of empathy. I mean, you have a point in that illnesses in the media obviously change people's perception of these illnesses. but we can't say that stories can't include these illnesses. In the same way that we have stories about people with other illnesses, like maybe someone with cancer in Fault in Our Stars, for example, you could do the same for mental illnesses. I think the bigger, more interesting question here is just how inaccurately do we portray more common illnesses? And on that, I think the simplest way to sort of fix that is just not allow so much artistic license, because I think that the problem with mental illness is that there is a lot of interpretation room because there's such a huge diversity of how these issues manifest. For example, if you look at the diagnostic criteria for depression, which is the topic of this talk, you'll see weight loss and weight gain both within the diagnostic criteria. So because of this diversity, like you have a lot of artistic license to portray even things like depression or anxiety however you want. So I think that the main issue then becomes, what kind of standard should we have? What should we consider too extreme? Because to a huge extent, you could say, okay, this is an inaccurate portrayal, and the writer could just say, no, it's not inaccurate. It's just something that some depressed people do face. So, those lines are, I think, what's interesting.
Yeah, that is right, because I think there again, it's because, I mean, you would think that, okay, Joker, and yes, I've seen Joker. I found it to be a very accurate portrayal of whatever illness he had. I don't know if he had schizophrenia or bipolar, I'm not really sure of it. But I found it to be quite accurate. And I think it all depends on the audience's perception of how they view the movie. They could either take it as, okay, this is so negative, it's so violent, this is how, someone with mental illness is going to do this. Or they take it as, hey, look, mental illness is actually a serious issue. It is quite serious. And we need to bring more awareness to it. We need to have people reach out for help, right?
Right. Okay. So, now talking about the effects of stigma, the stigma not only directly affects individuals with the mental illness, but it also affects the loved ones who support them, often including their family members, etc. So, for segment 2, I think it's important for us to bring to attention the rippling effect that this stigma has, not only on the person suffering from the mental illness, but on those around them.
I would say that we could try to partition this into talking about the effects this has on people personally related to that individual and people less personally related. So professionally, and third of all, society as a whole, as in the sum of all of these viewpoints and how they affect how we as a society respond to it. And within that framework, I think you'll see that it's very odd actually how stigma works. At least that's my view. So I would say that on a personal level, it's likely that if you have stigma within your family, you come to the viewpoint that number one, there's something that the person in your family is choosing to do that is making them suffer from a mental illness. But the second thing that often happens is that the hopelessness that someone with an illness might face sort of spreads to the person in the family. So one thing that I've seen quite often is that parents and family will just get extremely frustrated because they think that they know the reasoning behind their children's mental illness. They'll think the reason is maybe they're not, eating enough, exercising enough, or maybe they're just not, disciplined, or they don't have willpower, something like that. And when the person's condition doesn't improve, when the external effects of that mental illness still exist, their functioning is still difficult to perceive. They get frustrated because they think they're failing. So if you as a parent think that your child has some, is always sad and is getting socially disconnected because they don't have willpower or they don't exercise enough, you probably think it's your fault because you didn't raise them right. And I think that causes hopelessness in families as well. And this, I think, extends to siblings and cousins as well. So I think that parents often will end up putting themselves in really difficult situations because they think that they can solve the problem, but then they can't. And yeah, of course, the natural result is then to blame the child, but still.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, just to add to Shaurya, I think yes, hopelessness is there. You blame it on a different reason, but I think what parents or those around you fail to understand is that if anyone has a mental illness or depression, there's always an underlying reason to it, right? And I don't think that, so they don't have the kind of ability to just kind of go forward and be like, okay, let's just sit and talk through this and let me just understand what's going on with you. You just like put a label, okay, like Shaurya said, it's, you're not exercising enough, you're not concentrating enough, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. So it's just like all these given factors are already just put out there, and there's no time taken to really sit down and be like, okay, what is actually happening with my child or with my friend or with my brother or sister. And I think even professionally, I, you know, from my my role as, you know, inclusion leader, I think that's what even our teachers, we see that they always put it to, oh, this child is so he's not behaving really well. They don't really say, okay, why is he not behaving really well? You know, let me just go to his level and see what is really difficult for him. You know, what is she struggling with? Why isn't she expressing herself? Right? So I think it's all about just going down to the person's level and just seeing, okay, what is really happening? What is the underlying reason to these issues?
Yeah. And another effect that the stigma has is like I said in the beginning, it's primarily the reason why so many people with mental illness are not getting treated, because of the stigma that's associated with it. Because like I said, like that one TED talk that I saw, you know, she really explained it well, how so many people you know, in the US jail, for example, they suffer from schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. And the reason that they ended up in jail is because they were not treated for it, and that's because there is a stigma. Because had they had been treated, like, you know, she got treated, which is why she was like, you know, if I wouldn't have got treated, it may have escalated to such a level that even I would have ended up there. So that's another very, very poor effect that it has, the stigma.
Yeah.
Okay, so now for segment 3, the final segment, we wanted to talk about how people like you and me can break the stigma, which we already kind of spoke about, but kind of reiterating on it. I think I'll start by saying something that I heard in the TED talk that I was again referring to. You know, Ellen, she mentioned about how the entertainment industry, how they what they can do to help enlighten people regarding the subject. Again, like how we discussed that, you know, some portrayals of the mental illnesses are not appropriate, some are, but the entertainment industry is really big. So if they start portraying characters with mental illnesses with, like, you know, a range of them, rather than just showing the very bare extreme where it goes to, like, you know, violence and all of that, I think that can really help, because that can really influence people's uh, like their understanding of people with these mental illnesses. So that's, I think that's one thing in addition to what we spoke about, enlightenment and educating people about it. Is there anything else you guys want to add?
So I have quite a few thoughts on this. The first one I want to point out is look at how positively people look at exercise. And just think about that for a second. Because the reason people look at exercise so positively, if you go to the gym, you play a sport, is because they think it helps your body and improves it. It's not necessarily a sign of weakness, right? You don't exercise because you've gotten yourself into a stupid situation. So I think that positive psychology being more publicly available would create that attitude as well. So if people who are not suffering from mental illnesses were to see that maybe not necessarily therapy, but sort of good mental health practices can help them become more, let's say, calm people, help them be more reflective, be more thoughtful, or maybe even just more relaxed, then it would seem almost natural to say that someone with a mental health issue should go for therapy or something. So I think one of the main things we could do is publicly push for positive psychology, so people without mental illnesses also see the benefits of it. The second thing I want to say is that therapists cost money. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns that people have before going to therapy, which is that parents think that they're effectively either being scammed or being sort of like ripped off in one way or the other, where they think that why should I spend so much money on my child sort of going and doing
Exactly.
XYZ, like just talking to someone basically. And I think the solution to that is, well, it's quite difficult because the main solution is for the parents to sort of understand themselves whether they think it's the right therapy. I mean, not all therapy is talking, right? Like obviously CBT includes the C part, but also the P part. So there's that. But I think the second solution is based on the media part that you mentioned. If we were to portray therapy in media as something that is not about comfort, it's not necessarily just about someone having another person in the armchair tell them, yes, you're valid, something, something. If it's more productive, if it's shown to be what it actually is, which is a solution to a problem, it would work a lot better. So, for example, I remember watching, I
Dear
forgot that movie,
Zindagi,
the
yeah,
one
we're
with
just
Shah
gonna
Rukh
talk
Khan
about
and
that, yeah.
Alia Bhatt. Oh, Dear Zindagi, yeah. It's a very weird movie. I think I found it a bit weird. I don't know why there was like weird romance
There
subplot.
was.
But the main plot included her going for therapy and working towards fixing her problems. And I think that those kind of portrayals are a lot better than something like, well, I wouldn't say Joker, but something that sort of uses mental health for its entertainment value. So yeah, if we portray therapy as sort of like a solution, as something you do to help yourself in the same way that we portray exercise, it would help a lot more. Because right now, I think most parents, and even forget parents, I don't know why we're like wailing on parents so much. Like just people who don't think mental illnesses or therapy are so serious. The main issue they have is therapy is just crying about your life. That's what they think. So if we were to show that it's not, it would be a lot better. That's my point.
Yeah, I think now what schools are doing, they're having all this mental health classes, and having these webinars or workshops. And I think that's super important, because bringing awareness about mental health to adolescents and students. I think that's where it starts from, right? All this violence, and all this gun violence in the US and stuff. It's all stemming from I don't know, the impact that mental illness has on these children and students. So introducing, because back in our time, we didn't have any of that. We didn't have psychology. We didn't have psychology as a subject. So for us, I was as ignorant as another person. So when I really dived into psychology and the whole idea of therapy and how therapeutic it could be, as opposed to what the media portrays it to be, my knowledge was zero. And the media does portray mental illness in a very negative manner.
Yeah,
Like, okay, the Joker movie, it comes off as it's a violent movie. Then there are other movies. Split, you mentioned Split, that also comes off as somewhat violent. So I think the media portrays mental illness in a very negative manner, and that has an adverse effect on society's perception and seeking treatment. Now, treatment and therapy, by the way, just to add to Shaurya, yes, it is expensive, but there are resources available for affordable treatment and counseling sessions and stuff. And in schools nowadays, therapy sessions are like free. Parents don't pay for anything, so it's just part of your school experience. So nowadays you're more open to say, hey, you know what, can I go to my counselor? I feel very overwhelmed. And you just go to the counselor and you just have a talk for an hour, and that's completely fine. It's acceptable now. But back in my day, I was sent to the counselor because I had an attitude problem, and I was sent to the counselor, by the way. She sent me to she's like, you stand up, you go to the counselor because you have attitude problem. So, and I was sent to the counselor not to talk about why I have an attitude problem, but she just did like a personality test on me. She's like, you're fine, you're okay, you're just a bit stubborn and you're like this, but it's okay, go back to class. So that's how it was. So now when we have a child come into my office to talk about, okay, something happened in class, we actually sit and we tell the child, okay, want to talk about it? Let's talk about it. What happened? Before we get any kind of feedback from the teacher or anybody else, we always ask what the student's opinion is, what their feedback is, and then we work on that. And I think it starts with schools being more inclusive. So by, I don't know if you guys know what that means. Inclusive is, providing like an equal opportunity to everyone in school, right? So making the environment more acceptable for all. So you don't really like put them in under special labels or categories. You just make it more acceptable. So yes, there is a difference. There is an improvement. There is progress into how society is sort of viewing mental illness now.
So you think some of the solutions include, number one, encouraging people to listen to students and listen to people who are sort of, having the issues.
Definitely.
And second of all, you think that we should have a more inclusive environment where we consider this something that's more normal and we don't make it an other.
Yeah. Outside my office, what we've done is we don't have a name to our office. So we have no name. So we're just the office that has no name, because if we go and put SEND department or inclusion office, it's like, oh, that stigma is there and the taboo is there. So next to our office board, we have these celebrities, like, for example, Ryan Gosling, and then we have, I think, Keira Knightley, and there's quite a few celebrities who do have anxiety, who have depression. I think Ryan Gosling, I don't know if he's dyslexic, I'm not sure about that. So we have celebrities who do have these kind of, disorders and mental illnesses. So we put posters of that just to sort of make people understand, what, it's okay. It's okay that I have an issue with writing. It's okay that I have an issue with math. It's okay that I have an issue with speaking, or, I'm a bit behavioral sometimes, or have impulsive thoughts. It's completely okay. Just letting society know that it's okay.
Yeah, that's very correct. Like, even like what you said, people with the mental illness, if they come out and talk about it more openly, like how, in whatever form it may be, a talk, any form that they are, like, educating people, it can make other people feel more fine and kind of normalize it, not treat it so much as being like, much different to the other diseases that are there, like how we discuss cancer and everything like that.
So sorry to interrupt, but I think I'm going to bring in an extremely unexpected viewpoint from me that I'm sure will shock everyone. But I think there should be more public debates in psychology. And the main reason I say that is because there is a belief that psychology is very monolithic and that there is only a few solutions to a few problems. And that is often what causes a few problems. The first problem is that parents, I say parents a lot, but skeptics, I'm just going to use the word skeptics, believe that there is effectively sort of a conspiracy or some kind of united viewpoint that people want to make money by selling you bad solutions, right? And that there's no disagreement whatsoever. There's always these few bad solutions. So, for example, you go to one therapist, it doesn't work, so you just give up on the entire field, right? The second thing I think that happens is that there's this viewpoint that there is a lack of skepticism within psychology. So, for example, one of the main criticisms I hear is maybe this child needs to focus on something else, and the psychologist is wrong with the therapeutic suggestions they're giving. Which I think the thing about doctors is that when we think that with a doctor, we often think maybe another doctor would give better solutions, maybe another doctor would be more informed. But with psychology, often the result is maybe psychology as a whole is wrong, again, because there's this monolithic view. If you had more public discussions of how different psychologists consider different treatments to work and how there's such a range of things you can try, and that you don't have to just do like talk therapy. You can do so many things. Like you can do behavioral stuff. You can do, you can, I mean, if you really want, you can do like Freudian stuff with hypnosis or whatever. And if you want, you can do biological things like antipsychotics. So I think like the more publicly we show the sort of disagreement within the field and the range of viewpoints and the range of evidence that comes with those viewpoints, people are much more likely to take it seriously. Because I think there's three people that we can convince, right? The first people are people who are going to be extremely opposed to psychology and extremely opposed to treatments at all. They're not going to change their mind anyway. The second category is probably people who already agree with it and are probably pretty positive against it. Third category are people who are thinking still, they're in the middle. And those sort of swing voters are going to be convinced by sort of being told that they're not going to be ignored, sort of like their skepticism is going to be addressed instead of ignored. They're not just going to be told, you're stupid, you're unaware, you're ignorant. They're going to be told, look, there's so many things that you can explore. Maybe you're right, but it doesn't mean that the entirety of psychology is wrong. Some part of psychology might agree with you. I think that would be the best way to stop those two problems.
That's a very interesting viewpoint. Okay, but yeah, I think with that we can conclude today's episode. Yeah, so hope everyone listening to this learned something.
If you liked this episode and you found it informative, please do share it with all your family and friends, and make sure to follow us on Spotify, Instagram, YouTube, and everywhere else.
Thank you and have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Make sure you don't have polio.
Bye.
Nice talking to you guys.